The Millennium, a prophetic forecast by Johanna Brandt. Part 2, Personal, a fragment of autobiography. Chapter 15, First appearance of the messenger. He sent from above, he took me, he drew me out of many waters. 7 Samuel 22, verse 17. It was night. The angel of death hovered over Harmony, seeking entrance into my mother's bedroom, where she had lain speechless and unconscious during the last 48 hours. Will she recognize us? Will she be able to utter a word of farewell? We asked each other, and asking shook our heads. She was too far gone. It was the night of December 1st, 1916, at Harmony, Pretoria. The house had been full of people during the evening. My brothers and their wives had been there, with other relatives till a late hour. There had been no change in the patient's condition when they left, and my sister and the nurse had taken the first night watch while I slept. It must have been nearly 1:30 a.m. when they reluctantly rose me to take the second watch, as we had agreed. They were both worn out with long watching, and I refused all their offers to keep me company, insisting that they would be unfit for the next day if they took no rest. And so it came about that I was alone with my dying mother that night. It had to be so. It had been foreordained. The patient was under the influence of the merciful draught, which had deadened the agonies of that long, long deathbed. There was no certainty that she would pass away before morning, and I took my seat beside her bed in an easy chair, with a favorite book, which I tried in vain to read. The house was soon settled in deep quiet. Feeling refreshed in mind and body by the few hours' sleep which I had unexpectedly enjoyed, I settled myself so that I could watch the patient's every movement and follow the changes in the labored breathing. Fitfully, painfully they came and went, those panting breaths, with every now and then a long silence, as if the last had flown. And at such times I would start to my feet and, bending over her, would hold my own breath, anxiously to catch the sound of hers. And each time the panting breath would be renewed. I felt that this condition might remain unchanged for some hours still, and made up my mind not to rouse the weary inmates of the house before the time, if I could help it. Gradually I ceased to be alarmed by those long silences, and settled myself more comfortably to think and pray. Uppermost in my thoughts, as usual, was the deep tragedy of that blighted life, and I asked myself again, as I had done 100 times during the last 10 or 12 years, why had it to be? How could one single act of heroism and devotion be crowned with such disaster? And now she was broken at last. The proud head had been brought low. The flashing eye, before whose piercing dart so many had quailed, was closing in death at last. Deeply tender, fervent, and intense can be the prayer of a child beside the deathbed of a mother. And I prayed for her speedy deliverance, not for her life. I believe there can be no danger of evil influences reaching us at such moments of spiritual exaltation. I believe that at such times in our lives, when self and the world have been forgotten, there can be no possibility in the remotest degree of our being approached by an unseen enemy. Neither can I believe that we can be deceived and misled when we have cast ourselves in perfect trust and abandonment on our God. When, on the borders of eternity, we have lost ourselves in contemplation of the divine. And it is this conviction which gives me the assurance that the events of that night were born of God, and at the same time gives me the courage to share my experiences with my fellow creatures. I must now endeavor to describe in human language that which can only be conveyed from spirit to spirit. I must transmit a soul experience through the medium of the physical senses. And how can that be done? Such efforts are foredoomed to failure, for only those who have gone through similar experiences will understand the inner meaning which lies hidden beneath words and symbols. While I was sitting thus absorbed in prayer and thought, with a clearness of perception and an intensity of consciousness, such as I had hitherto never experienced, I became aware of a mighty presence in the room, and at the same time a voice, calling me by my name, struck my inward spiritual senses. Thou fearless one, what thou hast done for land and people has been well done. Henceforward thou art called to greater things. So sweet and clear and penetrating was the voice that I glanced up and round to see where it came from, and then at my mother to see if she had not been disturbed by it. "Who art thou?" I whispered. "A messenger from on high. In many tests thy mettle has been proved. In darkness and despair thou hast not wavered. And much that is obscure now will shortly be revealed to thee. I now anoint thee with the spirit of prophecy, in token of which thy mother's parting hour will be revealed to thee. Now close thy eyes." I obeyed, and my watch rose before my mental vision, with the hands pointing distinctly to 5 minutes to 5. It was instantaneous, like a lightning flash which reveals the details of a scene with incredible clearness. I glanced at my watch, where it lay on a small night table, and found it was exactly 2 o'clock. That the information conveyed to me in this strange way was reliable, I did not doubt for a moment, and I rose quietly to call my sister and the nurse. An unseen hand restrained me, and the same voice commanded me to stay. "Thou shalt watch alone. I have somewhat to say to thee. Alone shalt thou watch 3 hours, thou fearless one." A feeling of intense awe well nigh overwhelmed me, and I longed to flee from that room. The insistence with which those words, "thou fearless one," were spoken, conveyed far more to me than the words themselves, revealing to me, as no human language could have done, that I stood on the brink of unutterable things, and that I have need of all my courage to bear them. After a sharp conflict in which I realized that I was a free agent, at full liberty to go or stay as I chose, I sat down, bowed my head, and murmured, "Thy will is done. See in mercy the handmaiden of the Lord." During those 3 hours I had 3 visions, each lasting more or less an hour, in the first of which, to my intense amazement, my mother's spirit seemed to take the place of the unknown messenger. She had so much to say before she left this sphere, and my soul communed with hers as it had never done before. While with the physical senses alert and watchful, I followed her dying body's panting breath. What passed between us in that hour was not meant for publication, although it has been recorded in detail in my diary. Suffice it to say that she, with the enlarged vision of the enfranchised spirit, told me why she had suffered so, and impressed on me the necessity of keeping harmony from falling into the hands of strangers. Harmony had been sanctified by suffering. Harmony was destined for a great and noble purpose, which would shortly be revealed to me, and she solemnly urged on me to keep harmony intact at any cost, for she had sacrificed her life to its preservation. As flood after flood of light burst over me, the tears streamed from my eyes. She left me, and in the second vision, an exalted being, stern and uncompromising, took her place, pointing out to me the dangers and difficulties of the life of service. With searching questions, he seemed to probe the secrets of my shuddering soul, saying, "Forsake the world. If thou wouldst serve, thou shalt be stripped of every earthly attribute, and drain the cup of suffering to the dregs." And when I would have perished with awe and fear, a calming hand was laid on my heart. Peace be unto thee in this hour, peace and strength. Of the ecstasy of the third hour, no record has been preserved. It passed. My eye fell on my watch, and I rose quietly. It was 5 minutes to 5. Through the blinds, a steady stream of light proclaimed the birth of a new day, which was to bring relief, new life to a tortured soul. The patient's breathing was now coming and going in fitful gasps at long intervals, and without a moment's loss of time, I roused my sister and the nurse, and hastened back to my mother's room. We sent for my eldest brother next door. "When did this change take place? She is dying," said the nurse. But suddenly a change came over the patient's face. She opened her eyes with the light of full recognition in them, and tried to speak. She had so often promised to come back from the dead, if she possibly could, to tell us what it was like on the other side. She now indeed seemed to come back from another world with the unearthly glow and radiance of celestial spheres in her eyes. She recognized us all, and tried to tell us of the people she had seen, and of the indescribable glories of music and flowers of the heaven world. She bade us one by one a long farewell, answering our questions by signs and broken monosyllables, until she sank into an unconscious state, from which she passed that evening into the last deep sleep. Like one in a dream, I told my brothers and sisters of the strange experience in which I had seen the hands of my watch pointing to the hour at which I was to assemble the household to take leave of her. But the other revelations and the story of the 3 visions I kept to myself, although the remembrance filled my mind to the exclusion of everything else. Above all, my heart was filled with the glad assurance that I had not been deceived, with the growing conviction that the messenger had indeed been sent from heaven with a sign, a tangible proof of his divine origin, and that therefore I could and should trust that all would yet be well. The hour appointed by him had been her parting hour indeed, the only hour in which she was fully conscious during the last 2 days and 3 nights. And I could no longer doubt that the other revelations of that night would be made clear to me in time. When kind death came for her at 10 o'clock that Saturday evening on the 2nd of December, a heavenly peace seemed to descend on Harmony. At her own request, she was to be taken to Heidelberg, to be buried in my father's grave. And as she left her beloved Harmony, the next morning, a storm of unparalleled violence broke over us, a veritable tornado, in which peals of crashing thunder rolled overhead, and forks of angry lightning lit the clouds in blinding flashes, while the howling wind shook the house, sweeping torrents of rain before it. It seemed a fitting close to that life of storm and long-drawn suffering, and brought with it the promise, nay, the assurance, that now it was well with her indeed. For soon the sun broke out in radiant splendor, dispersing the sullen muttering clouds as if by magic. I would fain avoid the recital of all events of personal nature in this story, but it would be impossible to convey a true impression to my reader of the developments which followed one another in quick succession, without giving some details of the preparation which seemed to have been necessary for the supreme event which I am about to describe. The reader may be assured, however, that no unnecessary details will be given, and that only a very small part of what actually took place will be related to the barest outline of the most stupendous experience which can fall to the lot of any human being. I accompanied my brothers on that strange journey to Heidelberg. Outwardly calm, I fulfilled my duties and underwent a series of marvelous coincidences, as the world would call them, without betraying a sign to anyone. These coincidences increased as the day went by, and always and everywhere I was conscious of the presence of the messenger, who had visited me beside my mother's deathbed. And though these events are fully described in my diary, they are too personal in nature to be repeated here. Marveling deeply, I returned to my home in Johannesburg. In the days that followed that period of indescribable suffering, of physical exertion and spiritual amazement, I became conscious of a feeling of bodily exhaustion combined with an abnormal clearness of thought. I found myself in an exalted frame of mind in which there was no room for pain nor anxiety of any description, but in which the darkest problems of life were solved, and I was able to see things in their true perspective, separating the true values from the false with new judgment. Throughout the month of November, I had slept very little indeed, and now I longed for rest. This, however, was denied me, for I had to proceed almost immediately to Pretoria to be present at a consultation with my sister and brothers on the winding up of my late mother's estate. My husband took me to Pretoria and left me at Harmony, where my sister and I spent the days in disposing of my mother's personal belongings. We decided to sleep in my eldest brother's house next door, because we could not face the nights in that tragic memory-laden atmosphere at Harmony. And there in the sitting room, 2 beds were improvised for us. And there, would that I had the tongues of the angels of heaven to describe what took place there. Although the physical weariness increased steadily, I was able to busy myself all day with the details, with accompanying the breaking up of a home. But at night, sleep was far from me. I pondered over those revelations from an unseen world with growing wonder. What did they mean? At the family councils, I had strenuously opposed the sale of Harmony, declaring that I had promised our mother to keep it intact and not to allow it to pass into the hands of strangers. Not a word did I breathe even then of the visions I had had. I seemed to be waiting for something. That something came most unexpectedly in the night. I had fallen into a few hours deep sleep, from which I woke at about 2 a.m. on Thursday, December 7th, 5 days after my mother had passed away. Awoke with a feeling of death over me. I was icy cold and unable to move, but I felt the death sweat trickling down my face, and although I had had no experience of anything like that before, I knew instantly that I was in a heart failure. I tried to call my sister, but was unable to produce a sound. I wailed, therefore, without fear or anxiety, but with a sense of physical oppression, which made breathing slow and laboured, waiting for the end. With the same acute consciousness and clearness of perception which had marked my menial state during the past week, I wondered how it was that I had never known that my heart was weak. And I marveled that death should come to me so suddenly, to me, who had always feared that death would overlook and forget me in his search for more unwilling victims. I looked death in the face and found him, as I had always expected to find him, strangely sweet, austerely beautiful, and he had not forgotten me. And then the darkness of the night was transformed into radiance, more dazzling than the sun, and the same voice, which had addressed me beside my mother's deathbed, addressed me now in the same words, calling me by my name. Thou fearless one, what thou have done for thy land and people has been well done, but art thou willing to go a step further? Art thou prepared to give thy life for the welfare of South Africa? Unhesitatingly I answered, while the flood of glory round me deepened, if it be thy will, I am not only prepared, but willing, glad. Then thou shalt this day write a message to South Africa, and through South Africa to the whole world. For this day thou wert born, and all thy life has been a preparation for the revelations to be made to thee now. Thou wilt receive the necessary strength to fulfill thy task today. But know this, it can only be done at the cost of thy life, which thou dost bring as a willing sacrifice. Thou art chosen, but not compelled. Blessed is South Africa. Blessed thou, through the thousands who will be blessed through thee. Rouse thy sister now, and tell her what has been revealed to thee. Slowly, and almost imperceptibly, the lifeblood had begun to flow, warming my icy hands and feet, and after a few moments I was able to rise and cross the room to where my sister lay. Waking her gently, I sat down beside her on the bed and told her all that had taken place. the oppression on my chest was not over, and I was obliged to walk slowly up and down the room every now and then to get my breath. My sister remained calm and strong, but insisted on sending for Dr. Veal, the same good doctor who had attended our mother for so many years. She laughed at the idea of my dying, saying that I was naturally worn out after the long strain of nursing and in need of complete rest. At my request, however, she waited until the sun rose, and we talked quietly for more than an hour. Then, as I felt the approach of another heart attack, she put me to bed and immediately sent my brother to Harmony to telephone for the doctor. In the meantime, I gave her many instructions and asked her to bring me some writing paper and a pencil, which she did immediately. It was a comfort to find her taking the matter seriously, although I realized even at that moment that there was no opposition, simply because it was not considered advisable to thwart me in anything. What the doctor's verdict was after a thorough examination, I have not heard to this very day. I was absorbed in my own reflections and in my preparations for death, which I did not doubt would come before the evening. And there was so much to do. I took the calming draught obediently, which the doctor had prescribed, hoping that it would enable me to write. But it made me sink into a deep sleep, which lasted several hours. When I woke, I found the messenger beside me.